Imani Uemana was just finishing up her day at work in Kigali when her phone rang. She saw it was from the hospital, and a chill ran down her spine before she even answered. On the other end, a shaky voice told her something she never expected. Her father, Benny Uemana, had been in a car accident. They weren't sure he would make it. Her heart thumped so hard she thought it might burst, and her mind went blank for a second. She didn't waste a moment. Jumping into a taxi, she kept thinking about her father, how he had always been her rock, her safe place. She remembered his laughter, the way he would patiently explain things, how he'd protect her from every worry in the world. Now, she was running toward a place filled with fear she had never known, a fear she couldn't push away. When she arrived, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and urgency. Doctors and nurses moved quickly, their faces tense. Machines beeped and monitors flashed lights she didn't understand, making the room feel unreal. Then, a nurse approached her, whispering in a voice so quiet it felt cruel, He's not breathing." The words hit her like a hammer. Everything froze. She couldn't think, couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The man who had always been there for her, the one person she trusted completely, was gone, or so she thought. Panic, disbelief, and a deep, aching sorrow washed over her all at once. The world she knew had shattered in a single phone call. Imani sat by her father's empty hospital bed, and her mind drifted back to her childhood. Benny Uemana had always been quiet, but there was a strength in him that made everything feel safe. He wasn't the kind of father who shouted or demanded. He taught by example, showing love in small, steady ways and holding a firm sense of right and wrong. If something felt unfair, he would speak up, and Imani learned early that honesty and courage mattered more than anything else. Life had never been simple for them. When Imani was a little girl, her mother had passed away, leaving Benny to raise her alone. He managed to balance discipline with warmth, teaching her lessons without breaking her spirit. They had moved from Jisinyai to Kigali for better work opportunities, and Imani often helped him run their small business. She remembered the long days in the shop, counting stock and learning how to deal with customers. Even though it was hard work, those moments were filled with laughter and quiet pride. Benny always made her feel capable, like she could handle anything. Imani remembered the evenings when her father would sit with her on the porch, talking about life, work, and the importance of standing up for yourself. He had this way of making her feel heard, like nothing she said was too small or silly. And even when he had to be firm, she knew it came from a place of love, not anger. Now, seeing him lying unconscious, all those memories came rushing back. Every lesson, every shared laugh, every quiet moment of guidance felt painfully fragile, as if someone had taken a sharp knife to the safe, steady world he had built around her. She realized how much of herself had been shaped by him, her courage, her values, her sense of right and wrong. And in that moment, she understood just how much she stood to lose if he didn't make it. The thought alone made her chest tighten, her hands tremble, and her heart ache in ways words could not capture. Every memory of her father was now a fragile thread, and she clung to them desperately. The news came like a punch she couldn't block. The doctors confirmed what Imani had feared the most. Her father was gone. Clinically dead. No heartbeat, no breath. The world seemed to tilt around her, a dizzy, unbearable weight pressing on her chest. She barely remembered how she got home, barely remembered talking to anyone. But life didn't pause for grief. She had to prepare the funeral. Her uncle Eric Mugisha was there, steady and calm, guiding her through the arrangements. They chose the coffin together, arranged flowers, and called family and friends. Imani went through each task in a haze, her mind half elsewhere, replaying her father's voice and laughter, the way he would shake his head at her small mistakes, the quiet pride in his eyes when she succeeded. Every little detail of the funeral felt both impossible and necessary, like honoring a life she wasn't ready to let go of. As mourners began to arrive, Imani noticed things she hadn't before. Bruises on his arms, faint but visible, and a scratch on his hand. She hadn't seen them in the hospital, they hadn't been mentioned. And then there was the folder clutched tightly in his belongings, papers peeking out but no one explaining what they were. Her stomach tightened with unease. Something didn't feel right. Her father's death wasn't supposed to have loose ends, yet here were signs that didn't add up. People came to console her, offering words of sympathy that barely reached her ears. She nodded and smiled faintly, but inside, a cold suspicion began to take root. The grief was raw and consuming, but beneath it, her instincts whispered a chilling warning. This wasn't a simple accident, and perhaps her father's death was far from ordinary. Even in the midst of mourning, a spark of alertness flickered in her mind. She realized she couldn't let sorrow blind her. Not yet, not when something about his passing felt deeply wrong. That feeling nagged at her, a quiet hum under the noise of the funeral, insisting she pay attention. The hospital was quiet, almost eerily so, as Imani sat beside her father's bed. The hum of machines and the faint smell of antiseptic filled the room, but her attention was on the stillness of Beni Uemana. She had been there for hours, holding his hand, whispering words she barely knew she believed. "Stay with me, Papa, please." Her eyes were tired, and her heart felt heavy, caught somewhere between hope and despair. Then, something caught her attention, a faint flicker on one of the monitors. The steady rhythm of the machine skipped, and a soft, irregular beep echoed in the room. Imani leaned closer, her pulse quickening. At first, she thought it was her imagination, a cruel trick her mind was playing. But then it happened. Her father's eyelids twitched, and slowly, painfully, his eyes opened. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her chest tightened, and tears welled in her eyes. "Papa," she whispered, her voice shaking. His gaze was weak, unfocused, but there was recognition there. Then, with a faint rasp, he whispered a single word. "Thierry." Imani froze. Her heart leapt, then sank. Thierry, the family's business partner, the man she had trusted and laughed with at dinners, the man who had argued with her father recently over finances.
Everything seemed to slow. Her mind raced as the word repeated in her head. If her father had survived just long enough to say that name, it meant something. It wasn't random, it was a warning, a clue. Her body shook with a mixture of relief and terror. He was alive, but the danger was real. Someone she had trusted had crossed a line, and now the truth was out, whispered through the fading strength of the man she loved most. Imani gripped his hand tighter, her resolve hardening with each heartbeat. Tears ran freely down her cheeks, but they were not just for grief, they were for determination. She had been given a second chance, a moment to protect her father and uncover what had really happened. The night that had started in despair had shifted in an instant. Her father had survived, and with that single name, he had lit a fire inside her, one that would not be ignored. Imani couldn't sleep that night. Her father's weak whisper of a name kept echoing in her mind, Thierry. She began replaying every interaction, every meeting, every small argument her father had mentioned about the business. Slowly, the pieces started falling into place. Thierry hadn't just been difficult, he had been dangerous. Benny had always been careful with the finances, but Thierry had found ways to hide money, manipulate accounts, and cover his tracks. When Benny questioned him, the man's attitude had escalated, turning sharp, defensive, even threatening. Imani remembered her father's worried frown in the days leading up to the accident, how he had mentioned discrepancies in invoices and missing funds. It hadn't seemed urgent then, just business trouble, but now it painted a much darker picture. Her stomach churned as the truth hit her. Someone had tried to kill her father, and it was not a stranger. It was someone inside their circle, someone she had trusted, someone who had shared meals and jokes with the family. Thierry, the man who had smiled at her during holidays and exchanged polite greetings with her friends, had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. The betrayal felt heavier than grief itself. She had always thought danger came from the outside, from strangers or accidents, but this was different. This was personal. Someone she knew, someone she had welcomed into her home and trusted with her father's livelihood, had plotted violence against the man who had given her everything. Her mind raced with questions. How could he do this? Why betray the very people who had supported him? And worst of all, how close had he come to succeeding? Anger mixed with fear, twisting in her chest. But beneath it all, a spark of determination began to grow. She wouldn't let Thierry get away with this. He had underestimated her, underestimated the bond she shared with her father, and underestimated her ability to see through lies. The man she had laughed with at family dinners had revealed his true face, and Imani knew one thing with absolute clarity: she would make sure justice was done. Every thought, every plan, every action from that moment on was focused on protecting her father and exposing the betrayal that had come from within their own circle. Imani knew she had to act carefully. Her father had survived, but Thierry's betrayal ran deep, and one wrong move could let him slip away. She decided to start quietly, away from prying eyes. The first person she turned to was her father's assistant, Aon Nkurunziza. Ao had worked with Benny for years and knew the business inside out. Together, they went through financial records, invoices, and bank statements, looking for anything unusual. It didn't take long for Imani to notice the gaps. Invoices were missing, some payments didn't match the records, and several transactions seemed to vanish into thin air. Her stomach sank as she realized the extent of Cherry's manipulation. This wasn't just a simple argument over money. He had been covering something serious, and it had likely been planned for a long time. Imani didn't stop there. She checked security footage from the office and store, looking for anything that might hint at suspicious behavior. There it was, Cherry moving around late at night, sometimes alone in the office, sometimes speaking hurriedly on the phone. Odd phone calls, secretive meetings, and small things most people would ignore began to paint a clear picture of deliberate deception. Every discovery made her blood run cold, but it also strengthened her resolve. She realized that rushing to the police without solid proof could backfire. Cherry was clever and connected. If confronted too soon, he could erase evidence or create false stories. Imani needed strategy, patience, and precision. She began making careful notes, taking photos of the records, and keeping track of every oddity she found. Late into the night, she would sit with Ao, piecing together the puzzle. Each clue added to the betrayal she felt. How could someone so trusted plan harm against her father and their family? But even as anger simmered inside her, a quiet determination grew. Imani understood that exposing Cherry would require more than emotion. It would take careful planning and smart moves. Every missing invoice, every suspicious call, every secret action captured on camera became a piece of the truth she was determined to reveal. By the time she finished that first round of investigation, she knew one thing clearly. Cherry's time hiding behind lies was running out, and she would be ready when the moment came. Imani knew the next step had to be careful. She couldn't confront Cherry directly without proof, but she also needed him to reveal the truth himself. After long nights of planning, she came up with an idea, a meeting that looked completely normal, just a discussion about the family business, as if nothing had happened. Every detail was set, her phone cameras discreetly recording, a small recorder hidden in her bag, and Ao standing by to keep everything secure. When Cherry arrived, he was calm and confident, smiling like he had nothing to worry about. He didn't suspect that the woman he thought he had tricked was fully prepared, that every word and gesture was being captured. Imani greeted him warmly, keeping her voice steady, her demeanor relaxed. She asked questions about ongoing projects, profits, and supplier issues, all the while listening for the slightest slip or hesitation. From the hospital, her father whispered guidance when she checked in during breaks. Even weak from his injuries, Benny's sharp mind was still alive. He reminded her of details Cherry had overlooked, of past conversations that didn't add up. Imani used those hints carefully, dropping questions that seemed casual but were actually designed to push Cherry into revealing inconsistency. She noticed his micro-expressions, the tiny pauses before he answered, the subtle defensiveness creeping into his confident tone. At one point, she brought up a missing invoice, phrasing it as if she didn't suspect anything. Cherry stuttered, tried to cover it with a vague excuse, but the recordings caught everything. Imani stayed calm, letting him speak, guiding him gently but deliberately toward revealing more. She asked about certain payments, recent supplier calls, and financial transfers, things Cherry thought were unnoticed. By the end of the meeting, Cherry had done more than talk. He had confirmed the lies, the manipulation, and the intent to harm. Imani felt a mix of relief and satisfaction. Her plan had worked. The man who had plotted against her father had walked right into the trap, showing exactly what he had done. Sitting there, she realized how powerful careful observation, patience, and her father's wisdom could be. Cherry had underestimated her, and that mistake would cost him everything. Imani left the meeting with a clear sense of purpose. She now had the evidence, the proof, and the clarity she needed. The next step was confrontation, but this time, she would be fully in control. Imani felt a mix of nerves and determination as she prepared for the confrontation. This was the moment everything she had worked for would be put to the test. Lawyers and police were quietly in the room, but she didn't let their presence shake her. All eyes were on her, and on Cherry, who still wore the same confident, smug expression he had for weeks. He thought he could charm his way out of anything. She began calmly, speaking in a steady voice, explaining that she knew what had happened and that she had proof. Then she played the recordings, one by one, phone calls, office conversations, and meetings where Cherry had lied or hidden crucial information. She laid out the financial documents, highlighting the missing invoices, the manipulated accounts, and transfers that didn't make sense. The CCTV footage she had collected showed him sneaking around the office and making suspicious calls. Every piece of evidence hit him like a hammer. Thierry's mask began to crack almost immediately. His confident smile faltered, his words stumbled, and he tried to explain, to twist the story, to make it seem like a misunderstanding. But Imani stayed calm, letting him speak, letting the evidence speak louder than his excuses. She could see him realizing, too late, that nothing he said could undo what she had uncovered. What gave Imani strength was her father's voice in her mind. Even weak in the hospital, Benny had been her guide, teaching her patience, careful thinking, and courage. She channeled that calm, steady energy now, refusing to be shaken by Thierry's sudden anger or desperate lies. Each lie he told, each attempt to manipulate the story, only made him look weaker. By the time she finished, the room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner and the faint clicks of the recording devices. Thierry looked defeated, exposed, and powerless. The tables had completely turned. The man who had tried to destroy her father's life was now under control, facing the consequences of his action. Imani felt a mix of relief, exhaustion, and quiet triumph. She had done it, not just for herself, but for her father, for justice, and for the truth. For the first time in weeks, she could breathe a little easier, knowing that the danger was over and that she had turned betrayal into victory. Thierry was arrested that very afternoon. The police escorted him out quietly, while Imani watched, a strange mix of relief and exhaustion washing over her. The evidence she had gathered was airtight. There was no way he could talk his way out this time. She felt a weight lift from her shoulders, knowing that the man who had betrayed and tried to harm her father was finally facing justice. In the days that followed, the stolen funds were recovered, and the family business was secured. Imani worked closely with AO and the lawyers to make sure everything was returned safely, from bank accounts to supplier contracts. The sense of relief was enormous, but it came with its own quiet reflection. She realized just how close they had come to losing everything, not just the money, but her father, her family's trust, and the sense of safety they had taken for granted. Through it all, Imani spent as much time as she could with her father. Benny was still recovering, but his spirit remained unbroken. They would sit together in the evenings, talking quietly, sometimes just holding hands, grateful for each other's presence. Every word, every glance, reminded Imani of how precious life was and how much she had gained from his guidance and wisdom. She often thought about how he had survived just long enough to speak Thierry's name, an act that had saved them all. The ordeal changed her in ways she hadn't expected. She had faced fear, grief, and betrayal head-on and had come out stronger. She realized that patience, careful thinking, and courage could overcome even the darkest intention. The bond with her father had deepened, their trust and respect for each other stronger than ever. Imani also felt a quiet pride in herself. She had protected her family, exposed the betrayal, and secured justice. She knew that life could be unpredictable, that people she trusted might hurt her, and that challenges could come from the most unexpected places. But she had learned that intelligence, careful planning, and inner strength could turn the tide. Sitting with her father, watching him recover and regain his strength, she understood that they had survived not by luck, but by persistence, courage, and staying true to what was right. The shadow of betrayal had lifted, leaving behind clarity, justice, and a sense of closure that felt almost sacred. Months had passed since the ordeal, and Imani often found herself reflecting on everything that had happened. The fear, the grief, the shock of betrayal, it had all felt overwhelming at the time. Yet, looking back, she realized how much she had grown. She had faced challenges she never imagined and had come out stronger, sharper, and more determined. The family business, once threatened, was now thriving. With her father recovering and proud, Imani had taken the lessons he had taught her and applied them with confidence. She made careful decisions, expanded operations, and built new partnerships, all while keeping the integrity her father had valued above all else. Her leadership began to be noticed in Kigali, and she slowly became a figure others looked up to, not just for her business success, but for the courage she had shown in protecting her family and standing up against betrayal. Quietly, she shared parts of her story online, speaking to young African women about trusting their instincts and having the courage to confront injustice. She didn't seek attention or praise, but the response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from women inspired by her action, saying they felt braver because they had seen what one person could do when guided by clarity and courage. For Imani, the experience had become more than a fight for justice. It was a lesson in resilience. She had saved her father, preserved her family's legacy, and discovered a strength within herself she hadn't known existed. Every day reminded her that even in the darkest moments, patience, careful thinking, and courage could turn fear into action and betrayal into clarity. She carried that lesson with her, quietly proud, knowing that her journey had not only changed her life but had the power to inspire others to protect what they hold dear.